Now, my last questions are about the role of international community and also the role of international media. First, about the international community, there is a lively discussion about what kind of responsibility international community should have vis-a-vis non-violent pro-democracy movements, how international community should respond, how it should be helpful for those movements which are struggling for democracy. So looking at the umbrella movement and what umbrella movement needs from international community, what would you expect international community to do? How international community could help the umbrella movement without, of course, harming it or delegitimizing it by its efforts to help? And what actors in international community do you think might be most effective in terms of extending some kind of aid to Hong Kong pro-democracy movement?
Well,
Victoria and then Michael.
Okay, I guess the first thing is that Hong Kong people really appreciate all the international media attention on Hong Kong, because it really helps to some extent, you know, why the police would fire 1887 rounds of tear gas and then later on stop suddenly. Maybe they realized that, you know, there are all these international reporters based in Hong Kong, and everything was actually reported live around the world, and then it helps that there was also the entire movement has been live streamed. And so with international attention, there's a lower chance that the police would use force again to clear everyone. And so we also see that the message from Beijing is that, you know, deal with this. We don't like this, deal with this, get rid of the protesters, but we don't really want to see any bloodshed. And to some extent, yeah, people are really thankful of the presence of a large army of international journalists. And then there's another thing that people also are a little worried that, of course, every time Hong Kong people fight for democracy, there's this, I guess, somehow political rulers imagine that Hong Kong people must be stupid enough that they really cannot possibly understand why democracy is a good thing, why genuine universal franchise is a good thing. So since they are not really smart enough people, they have to be infiltrated or taught by some foreign evil forces. Right. And therefore, as a result, there's also been a very conscious effort of not getting international support, not seeking it.
Michael?
Yeah, I think there, in the constitutional sense, there's a kind of legitimacy to, say, foreign governments at least stating their views. Of course, the British signed the Sino-British Treaty, so they are party to this one country, two systems model, and yet China's government accuses the parliament of interfering when it wants to hold hearings on this umbrella movement. And the U.S. and other governments Beijing approached them when they created this model, and they have special relations with Hong Kong, independent of what relations they have with China, on Beijing's invitation. So while Beijing will condemn them for making comments, and that's really all they ever do, they just say they support democracy or universal suffrage. In effect, you could say there's some legitimacy to making comments, since the high degree of autonomy promised Hong Kong is the contingency by which these governments give Hong Kong a special status in international relations. So this kind of global attention, I think Hong Kong, as they say in the boxing game, fights way above its weight, and so it attracts more attention than most places on earth would for similar reasons.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, any last comments, Michael, Victoria, about the movement, the situation with the movement, and the maybe predictions how the struggle will develop in the coming weeks, months, or even years? And we talk about 2017 as the election year. What are your predictions given the current demonstrations and protests?
One thing I can say is that again, scholars of contentious politics, they say that in a struggle between rulers and challengers, it's really a chess game. So in a chess game, how do you know which side is going to win, which side is going to lose? It's really hard to predict. So I like to tell people that I really cannot make predictions, not because, that we don't really know enough, but because it is really an ongoing movement. So when do we date the end of the movement? So we have seen reports that say that suggest that maybe the umbrella movement has already failed. It has already failed in the sense that it hasn't really got what it wants. It hasn't really compelled CY to step down, or it is unlikely to convince Beijing to reopen the consultation process for electoral arrangements of the chief executive for 2017. But then at the same time, there have also been many people who are also pointing out that, well, you know, the movement actually has succeeded in a way that when we have to look at the processes, how actually you can have hundreds of thousands of people all on the street maintaining strictly nonviolent discipline, and people being so self-organized and, you know, cleaning up garbage and just responding to any calls for action. Whenever, you know, any sites run out of water, run out of supplies, medical needs, then other people will bring in new supplies. And then anytime, you know, whatever this government wants to do in the future, this particular chapter in Hong Kong's struggle for democracy is going to fundamentally change the dynamics. The ground underneath Hong Kong people the ground has been shifted completely.
My view is that in terms of the politics, I think if Beijing doesn't give in, I believe the Democrats will veto any bills, so we'll be stuck with what we have. And then I think that pressure is more and more focused on Hong Kong government. And that's sort of where it should be. Then it's very difficult for Hong Kong protesters to put pressure on Beijing, and it may be counterproductive. If it goes too high, they may face repression. So whether the party that I think is to be educated in this process, and it may not happen right away, is the Hong Kong government. If it doesn't step up and show more attention to Hong Kong interest and more guarding of Hong Kong's autonomy, then I think it will have a difficulty governing Hong Kong. That the people will stand in the way, even the Democrats in the legislature will obstruct the government's agenda. And so this government's going to have to, I think, remake itself as a little more of a Hong Kong people's instrument and not simply Beijing's representatives here. I think this is the challenge. And I think this is also the challenge for the protest movement to push forward in this way.